Good afternoon, everybody. The REC is the Recruitment Employment Confederation, for those of you that haven't come across us before. So our specialism, by what's in the title, is recruitment. We've got some colleagues here today talking to you or showing you the Good Recruitment campaign. But my role in the Recruitment Employment Confederation is I run the team that look after apprenticeships, qualifications, and the individual offering of membership, which we call the Institute of Recruitment Professionals. So today, that's me. Today we're going to talk about the levy. What is it? What's the obligation? Does everybody know what the levy is? Does everybody understand that the levy's coming? We can't do anything about it. We all know that, yeah. How do you as employers access the funds? I think that might be quite interesting for you. What can you spend those funds on? Who are the organisations involved in apprenticeships? And then I'm going to take any questions you might have. So if it's not up there, we can do it at the end. So in essence, sorry about the text, you're going to get all these slides. So if you're right at the back and you can't see it, in essence, the levy is 0.5% tax on your payroll bill. That payroll bill is calculated from your Class 1 secondary NIC contributions. So, the questions I get asked, if I have flexible workers who are employed in a temporary model, is that me, the employer, or the end user that pays that, or is it the agency that pays that? It's the agency that's responsible for paying it, not your own payroll. There is an allowance for that payroll. Now, everybody will have heard of the £3 million. Actually, the allowance is £15,000, which works out to be 0.5% of 3 million. So if you have a payroll bill of 3 million, then you may not necessarily pay the levy because your allowance as a company is 15,000. If your payroll is over 3 million, then let's be, for example, say it's 5 million, then you'll pay 0.5% over that 3 million. So in essence, you'll pay 0.5% of 2 million, therefore your levy contribution will be 10,000. There are no sectoral exemptions. So that means everybody's paying. It's a tax. Everybody's paying it. The government's paying themselves. So all of the public sector, they're all in. I'm an ex-soldier, the army's in. For those of you that follow football players' wages are in. There are no exemptions. If anybody here is involved in the construction industry and understands the CITB levy, there is already one, which is it's a levy for training construction workers. That does not exempt people. They are paying double. So this is a model. This is one that the government have put out that everybody uses. It's just exactly what I just said. Your £5 million on the top left, 0.5% would give you £25,000 minus your allowance of 15,000 means your levy due sum is 10. And if it's 2 million, your levy bill will be 10, but you're minus the 15, therefore you don't pay anything. You do not get £5,000 back from your allowance. The other thing that I would say is, well, if anybody has seasonal payroll bills, your payroll bill is calculated on a monthly basis. So your allowance is actually £1,250 per calendar month. Okay? There's a piece here about can be shared across companies connected. Companies connected, there has been an idea that people might start to break up companies. If they've got a small margin, small profit margin, they might start to break up companies to avoid this 0.5%. The connected companies is the HMRC definition of connected companies. Therefore, it's all about ownership. It's not different for this. So if you're a connected company now, then you'll be considered a connected company. One allowance per company. And it's only one allowance of 15,000. So you might have 5 brands underneath, but it's the group that will get the 15,000, not 15 for each brand. The levy will be paid monthly. It will automatically go into a digital account, which I'll show you an example of. And the first payment will reach your account, or will be due in your account in May. It's a month in arrears. So if your payroll bill for January gives you a £1,500 levy bill, you've got £1,250, so you will pay £250 in May against the levy, and it will appear in your account. The government, for anybody that's paying in, will add an additional 10%. So if you're paying £250 in, you'll see £275 in your account, because the government will top it up by 10%. Funds will expire after 24 months. So if you don't spend it, it's use it or lose it, and it's first in, first out. So the very first payment is May 2017 that goes in. That will stay available in your account unless you spend it until May 2019. And likewise, each month from rolling on, it will disappear. When you spend it, you spend actually the very first month. So even if you make your first spend in August, it will take May's money out first. Yeah, is that clear? The co-investment model is for those of you that are not going to pay the levy, or it's those of you that overspend your levy. Now, if you're not liable to pay the levy, so let's go back to that £2 million model, you will have no contribution. But you might want to hire an apprentice. So the government co-invest with you. Now, what that means is the government will pay 90%, and I'll come on to some of the caps of what an apprenticeship looks like, but the government will pay 90% of that for you, and you will pay 10%. For example, a £5,000 apprenticeship, the government will pay £4,500, and you pay £500. Anybody that's operating in the devolved nations, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, this that we're talking about, everybody in the UK pays that levy on their UK payroll, but the apprenticeships we're talking about now are in England. Those in Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland are still working out how they want to do it. But your apportionment of staff in those devolved nations, that levy money that you pay is taken and given to that devolved nation. So you can still access it in that devolved nation for those employees, just in a different way, and they haven't quite worked out, each devolved nation, how they're going to do it. If you've got any specifics about that, I will be around a bit later on and we can have a bit of a chat, but it is quite limited information at the moment. That's what your digital account looks like. I'm really sorry for those at the back, you won't be able to see it, but I've put it up as an example for your, when you get the slides. So you can see month by month by month down the left, what you're paying in the next column, and in this case they're paying in £3,208 a month. They don't spend anything in the first 3 months, and then they start to spend in August, which was the example I used earlier. They spend £6,000 of it. By that time, it's built a balance up and it takes it out first out. They then go on, this particular company then goes on, and by the November, they've overspent. So they've spent, in essence, 24,000 at this point, but they've overspent what they've got in their account. So they're asked to co-invest 154. And that's what it looks like. It's very simple to use. I've seen it, and it's not quite live for everybody yet. I've seen it. It's very, very intuitive. It's a bit like logging onto your mobile bank account, where you can see your bank statement live, and you can make transfers and payments and log things on and that kind of stuff. It's really quite intuitive. Obviously, if you're co-investing, the balance remains zero. What you can use those levy funds for, so you can use them for all apprenticeship training. And apprenticeship is the key. Apprenticeships, by the way, had the law change last year, or the government had the law change last year, so apprenticeship as a form of training has the same legal rights now as degrees. They're not equivalent in academic standard, but they have the same legal rights. So you cannot call something an apprenticeship that is not an apprenticeship. That's really key. and that's only changed last year, so I'm not sure if everybody's aware of that one. An approved framework or standard. I'll come on to what a standard is. A framework is what exists now. And these, for those of you that don't know, are probably somewhere in the region of 60, 70 pages of academic blurb that students and apprentices tend not to read. So they don't necessarily know what they're going to get out of the apprenticeship by the end. It can only be used with approved training providers and approved assessment organisations. And up to the maximum funding band, which we'll come on to in a moment. It cannot be used for wages. It cannot be used for travel and subsistence. Managerial cost is interesting. So if you have somebody drawing down funding, they can't bring an extra manager in to manage that process. Neither can you draw down funding to bring a manager in to look after apprentices. You have to foot that bill yourself, obviously. Work placement programs are out, and obviously things like traineeships are out because this is an apprenticeship funding. And you can't use it if you're going to set up a program. You could become an employer provider, for example. You can't use it for setup. There are some additional bits, and again, I apologise for the slides, but I want to get the information down. If you employ somebody on an apprenticeship that's 16 to 18, you, the employer, and the training provider receive a one-off payment of £1,000 each. That is a recognition that that particular age group may require, not always, but may require additional support throughout their apprenticeship. Also, disadvantaged young people, and that £1,000 is then extended from 16 to 18 to 19 to 24 is included, but those are recognised disadvantaged individuals that have got local healthcare or learning difficulties. Also, small employers. Is there anybody in the room that has employees under 50? Under 50 employees? No? I'll leave it there. We'll skip on. Additional learning support. So if anybody needs additional learning, again, they have to be assessed to know but that is £150 a month. So additional learning support. So as an examiner or as running the exams, my team will always look at things like learning difficulties such as dyslexia and the such like. That individual may require additional support. So there is additional funding. This is outside of the caps. And then separate to them all, in every apprenticeship you have to have what people know as functional skills. They're still there, and they're maths and English. Each standard that's coming in will tell you which level of English and maths they have. It's a fixed payment, and it's above and beyond the value of the apprenticeship. So funding bands. You can see, for those at the back that may not be able to see, they start at £1,500 for a year's training, and they rise up to £27,000. It's important to note that this is the value of the whole apprenticeship, not per year. And every apprenticeship from now on has to last a minimum of 12 months. They can last longer. The types of apprenticeships that are getting £27,000 of funding are 3-4 year programs who may be in aerospace working on jet engines, or engineering or medical or legal, those that require a lot of support. The majority of apprenticeships are hitting these three bands here, £4,000, £5,000, £6,000. Now, apprenticeship structures. So we talked about them very quickly. I introduced you to the frameworks as they stand now. They've been changed. There has been, not me, but there was the Richard Review, and they looked at apprenticeships and they said, well, actually what we need to do is change them because a lot of them are out of date. So they introduced something you may have heard of called Trailblazers. Trailblazers are not the name of the apprenticeship, they're actually the name of the design process for those apprenticeships. And every apprenticeship in the future has to have a standard. A standard is a 2-page document. And in that 2-page document, it details very clearly what are the skills, what's the knowledge, and what's the behaviours that an apprentice will need to reach by the end of their apprenticeship. It's that simple. There are other bits of information in there, so the standard will say if there are any mandated elements in the on-program. The second thing that happens with an apprenticeship is you have an assessment plan. And that assessment plan, by pure nature of what it's called, can tell you that actually what it's going to do is it's going to say, this is what you're going to learn, and this is how we're going to assess you. And by doing that, the organisations that are involved in the apprenticeships, be they the employer, be they the training provider, be they an assessment organisation, they're fully clear about what the requirements are. Now, if there are assessments on programme, they will be mentioned, but very different from every apprentice, well, not every, but very different from the vast majority of apprenticeships now. Now they are a completion exercise. In the future, with these standards, there will be an endpoint assessment. And an endpoint assessment is a synoptic assessment of the student's or the apprentice's ability. So, for example, on programme, if I just choose one that would be really easy to describe, bakery. On programme, the apprentice will be assessed about whether they can use the oven to the right temperature, whether they can mix the dough with the right ingredients, whether they know how long to bake the bread, or how long to bake a crumpet, or how long to bake. The endpoint assessment might be, produce me a loaf of bread. Because the assumption is that they have to get the other bits right to have a successful loaf of bread. So that's the synoptic element of it. Interestingly as well, they do not have to be formal qualifications. So you don't have to end up with a level 2, which is GCSE equivalent, or a level 3, or what. You don't have to end up with a qualification at the end of it. That assessment will be the award that's given to the student or to the apprentice. And there are various organisations involved apart from the employer. There is the apprenticeship training provider. They do what they say on the tin. They provide the training for that individual. They may as well provide the ongoing assessments. There's an endpoint assessment provider. And then, believe it or not, there's an endpoint assessment external quality assurance provider. And then there's a new organisation that's coming in called the Institute of Apprenticeships. I nearly said the Institute of Recruitment Professionals then. So there's lots of different people involved in this because there is government money. All of these people, apprenticeship training providers, need to go through the Ofsted ruling. They all need to be approved and accredited by the government so they can draw down government funds. If there are qualifications involved, and if the endpoint assessment is a qualification, the endpoint assessment provider has to be, if it's a regulated qualification, they have to be approved by Ofqual, the Office of Qualifications. The EPA, so the external quality assurance for the endpoint assessment sometimes may be one of those government bodies. So for the recruitment ones, for example, the external quality assurance is going to be Ofqual, because the recruitment one does have qualification in it. And the Institute of Apprenticeships is going to take over from, so for those of you that have been involved in the apprenticeship design, you'll know it started with BIS, which became BAYS, and then they handed over to the Department for Education, and now the Department for Education have started to hand it over to the SFA and the Skills Funding Agency, and now they're waiting for April until the Institute of Apprenticeships comes in and then they can hand it over to them. So it's been quite a long process. So apprenticeships in recruitment. At the moment, there are 3 apprenticeships in recruitment. There's an intermediate, an advanced, and a higher. And I've put the levels in so that you can see the academic types. A level 2 is a GCSE grade C and above standard. Level 3 is A-level standard. And level 4, in the standard academics, there isn't one. But for those of you that, like me, would remember the old HND, it's about that kind of academic standard. In the future, the 2 trailblazers that have been developed and are actually with Department for Education and Skills Funding Agency at the moment are recruitment resourcer and a recruitment consultant. And they're at level 2 and level 3. For funding purposes, we don't know yet what the funding levels will be, but we think they're going to be at that £5,000 or £6,000 mark. So if we go back to our original model, and you've got a £5 million payroll, and with your allowance, you'll end up paying £10,000 a year in, the actual effect on your levy without further contribution is going to be 1 or 2 of these with that particular model. Yeah? And in the future, the Trailblazer, these Trailblazer, or these apprenticeships that have been designed through the Trailblazer have to be designed by employers. And that employer panel have asked, in consultation, whether they can develop a degree apprenticeship in recruitment, which will be a much longer program, but it will end up with some more strategic things at the end. Now, one of the things I haven't said in the funding, but I think I really need to point out to you, in the existing frameworks here, you can only have somebody do an apprenticeship to the level above their academic standard already. So, if you have a student who has left school with GCSEs, they have to do a 3. If you have a student who has left, or if you're hiring a graduate with a degree, they're not going to get funded at the moment. With the new apprenticeships that come into the levy, they can, provided they are learning substantively different skills. So if you are hypothetically in engineering and you find a great engineer who you want to bring into your recruitment team, again being hypothetical, you can have them retrained as an apprentice through recruitment, regardless of the fact that they've got a degree, and they will be funded. The other thing is, if you might have caught it from my HND comment, I left school in the 80s. I would get no funding at present because I'm over 25, a lot over 25. But now, 16 to 65, I think it's 65, it might be 67 because of the pension age, but in essence, pretty much anybody of working age can get apprenticeship funding. And there are people that are starting to retrain in their later life. So that's a real benefit to these, is the fact that you can now have graduates they're not out anymore, they're in at any age. Right, I mentioned about development and the such like. At the moment, there are only 473 apprenticeships in development. That's correct at going to print. Might have had a couple more go on since then. Actually approved for delivery, 157. I don't know how many old apprenticeships there are. I asked the SFA who fund them how many old apprenticeships they are, and they said we don't know, which is interesting. Unless anybody can enlighten me, if anybody's got a government statistic that would be useful, but we don't know. There are thousands and thousands. So what they've said is they will fund the old ones out of your levy payments until such time as there are new ones to take over. The interesting thing as well, there's only 157 approved for delivery. Out of the apprenticeship, you can view them here. The development, when you get these slides, if you click on this link, it takes you through to the government website that lists them all. And actually, the apprenticeships in development, it lists them on a PDF document. It gives them 3 ticks. 1, if they're approved to be designed. 2, if they're designed and had their standard, that 2-page document signed off. And then 3 ticks ready for delivery if they've had the assessment plan done as well. And you can find the latter on the last click. As an employer, what you need to do, of course, other than pay your levy, if you're due it, is choose a provider. You can choose, and you can negotiate. So if you take, let's just be hypothetical, say the recruitment level 3 apprenticeship comes in at £6,000. If you've got a provider that you talk to and they say we're going to charge you 6, and another provider that says we're going to charge you 5, and you may not have enough in your levy account and you want to go for the cheaper one, you can. That funding band is the top. Yeah? Likewise, if you wanted to pay a bit more and have some extra training built in, you can pay a bit more, but you won't get any funding for that. You'll have to pay that as the employer. You have to choose an endpoint assessment organisation, and I've overtalked, haven't I? Yeah, I'll be quick. You have to choose an endpoint assessment organisation, and you may have different ones. And then you have to hire the apprentice, of course. Providers can be found here on the ROTAP. It's called the ROTAP, but it's not spelt ROTAP, which is the Register of Approved Training Providers. The last one closed on the 25th of November. There will be another one opening up later this month. So that will change later on. Endpoint assessments can be found here. If you can't find an endpoint assessment for the apprenticeship you want to take on, don't worry. When the Institute of Apprenticeship starts, they will do the endpoint assessments. There is quite a few endpoint assessment, quite a few standards out there that haven't got the endpoint assessments.